Greetings, this is the man who pretends to be Charles Darwin. And for many years before I retired, I drove around the continent and I took this camera with me in order to share with you some of the mysteries of ecology and evolution. That's also what the original Charles Darwin did. He traveled around the world on HMS Beagle and he made observations and notes upon which he later based some important scientific breakthroughs, the most important of which was the theory of evolution. The point is, keep your eyes open, ask questions about what you see, look for generalizations, and you might learn some of the, what we might call, the laws of nature. Now, one of the laws of nature that I would always teach and write about in the subject of botany is that the leaves of plants, whether individuals or species, that grow down in the shade of a forest have thin leaves. And the reason for this, or one of the reasons for it, is that if the plant had thick leaves, and if there was chlorophyll throughout that thick leaf, the leaf itself would use up so much of the light, the little bit of light that is in the shade, that by the time the light got down to the bottom of the leaf, there wouldn't be enough for that chlorophyll to make food for the plant. It's a bad investment on the part of the plant because the whole point of chlorophyll, the whole point of the leaf, is to make food for the plant. So why is it that plants that live down in the shade tend to have thin leaves? It's a matter of investment on the part of the plant. Now that's the general rule and it makes sense. Another thing is that if a leaf has thick layers of wax, that's usually something that protects it from desiccation during drought. That's not something that happens very often down in the shade of a forest. And so thick leaves and layers of wax on the leaves tend to be found in plants that are out in the open rather than down in the shade of the forest floor. One of the exceptions to that rule is the plant that's right behind me, the American holly, Ilex opaca. And this plant has thick leaves and it's got thick layers of wax on the leaf. And so it appears to be a perfect example of a plant that would grow out in the open rather than down on the forest floor. But where does it grow? Well, it grows in the shade of forest trees through much of eastern North America. Now, why does it do that? Well, it's an exception to the rule. 99 times out of 100, plants that live in the shade have thin leaves. But this is an exception. And it turns out that there is a reason for it. Unlike most of the forest floor plants, this plant is evergreen. It keeps its leaves all winter. And in many cases, in winter, the water in the soil is frozen, and so a plant that keeps its leaves all through the winter should have thick leaves with a thick layer of wax to prevent it from drying out when the sun, the winter sun, is hitting it after the leaves above it have fallen from the trees. It grows mostly in deciduous forests. And so there turns out to be a reason for this. But one might never have thought about the reason for it unless you knew the general rule that plants down in the shade have thin leaves, but there are exceptions. And it's true that plants that spend much time down in the shade of a deciduous forest in the spring and summer have thin leaves. But this plant has to survive during the winter in the full winter sunlight. And so this is an interesting exception to the rule. The rules and the exceptions teach us a lot about the natural world. Keep your eyes open, learn about the natural world, and ask questions as you travel around, whether it's widely to lots of natural areas or just in your garden. This is Charles Darwin. Tally ho.